Uh, there we go. Here I am, first licensed in 1969. So in January, I celebrated 55 years licensed. My Elmer, the guy that really started me from the age of 7, and then I got novice at age 14, he was Leo Meyerson, W0 Get Fat Quick. And for those of you old timers, you'd know exactly who he was. He was the founder and owner of World Radio Laboratories. And he got me started back in the 60s. I'm originally from Omaha, and I used to work there very often. I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. My career was as an IT field tech. So I fixed broken printers, networks, servers, and printers. Yeah, and lots of printers. I've written the monthly kit building column in CQ magazine since 2009. This would have been my 15th year of writing for them. I'm sorry to say that CQ has probably gone away for good. I have not heard anything since we put out the issue in October, and no word is not good word in the magazine business. A lot of print magazines are in trouble, as was QST and so forth. It is very expensive, and so it wasn't really a surprise. I'm also a contributing author for the ARL handbook, still have that title. And I have the construction techniques chapter. I also take a lot of photos and I enter the state fair. Kind of fun to do a little scenic and artistic photography. I first went to Dayton in 1975 and I've spoken there 32 times, and every year I make these musical slideshows, and they're on YouTube. So you can see the memories of Hamvention set to music. So let's talk about the things we want to keep on hand. First off, you're going to want to have assortments of pre-sorted standardized parts. And I like to get these assortments of resistors, capacitors, diodes, common transistors, and ICs. Used to be I would order them from places like Mauser or DigiKey or something like that. I now get them on Amazon. So if you go on to Amazon and you put in the search engine resistor assortments or capacitor assortments, and you'll find, like, for capacitors, there's ceramic discs, there's NPO capacitors, there's electrolytic, tantalums. There's all these different assortments, and each assortment costs anywhere from about $7 or $8 up to about $14 or $15. So for about $100, you can get all about the standard parts that you might want, and we'll go into why you're going to need that. But suffice it to say that there's no Radio Shack store that's open on Sunday or at all, or place to buy resistors or capacitors or something on Sunday night while you're working on your kit. And if it's missing a simple 10K resistor, well, you've got it if you have these pre-sorted parts. And so the assortments can be very affordable now. I like to keep on hand some 9-volt battery snaps and battery holders, and commonly used plugs and jacks, like your 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 2 and 3 conductor plugs, jacks, RCA phono plugs and jacks, and PL259s and SMA adapters. A lot of kits now are starting to use the SMA and BNCs. 12-volt coaxial power plugs. A lot of kits use that to get your 12 volts into it. So you want to know what the size of that is and if the center pin is positive. Most commonly, it is center pin positive and 2.1 millimeters for the 12-volt coaxial power plug. So I make up cables that have the 12-volt plug on it, and then I have the power poles, and I plug those into my main power supply and so forth when I'm testing kits, if they do take the 12 volts, and a lot of them don't. Like to keep on hand solder wick and other desoldering aids, because we do make mistakes. And I keep an emery board or two on hand for enameled wire and other purposes, like smoothing the edges of circuit boards. Um, and we'll talk about another use for the emery board in a little bit. Um, Cookie sheets are a must to protect your work surface, and it keeps parts from falling down in cracks or off the table or so forth. Some people also use a soldering mat, and many of those are magnetic and will fit inside the cookie sheet. And those are good also for ESD protection and so on. And you can ground the cookie sheet as well for uh, static discharge. Now, meters don't really have to be expensive, but you really ought to have one because that's the most basic piece of test equipment we use as kit builders. Now, a lot of people have the ones that are on the right, and the reason is they're like $3 on sale and like $6 or something at Harbor Freight. And I put it into the same kind of circuits as my Fluke 77 Series 2. And lo and behold, it's actually not that far off. So it's not quite as accurate as the Fluke, but it's pretty close. It's not quite as easy to use, but it's $6. You can't really go wrong, but just ignore that thing on the lower left that says NPN and PNP, because that's really difficult to figure out which lead is which, and we'll get into something that handles that in a little bit. So for $6, you're not going to go wrong. The thing on the left is a multimeter that's LCD, and it has an oscilloscope built into it. I think this is one of the coolest things that they've come out with lately. And these sell for around $60, $70, all the way up to about $120 for full color ones with cursors and everything on the screen. I thought this was really neat to be able to look at audio waveforms and things like that when working on kits, and it's all built into the meter. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So you can find those online as well. Just look up an oscilloscope multimeter. Soldering iron is probably the next most important tool you really got to have success with kit building. The particular one you see in the picture here comes from a company called extronikusa.com. And about 7 or 8 years ago, somebody came up to me at Dayton and says, Joe, you got to see this. And I said, well, what is it? And he came up to me after my forum, and he opens this box and he shows me this soldering station. He says, well, how much do you think I paid for that? And I said, I don't know. It's digital, temperature controlled and everything. It's got sleep mode. Even a roll holder. I said, probably pretty expensive. And he said, no, it was about $60. And he says, you'll never believe where it comes from. And I said, well, where does it come from? And he says, Lincoln, Nebraska. And I said, well, that's where I live. And I'd never heard of this place. And I called him up and got to visit with them. And they gave me a couple samples. And, for $60, you get a lot of stuff here because it comes with soldering and desoldering tools and things like that. The neat thing about this is that when you hang up your handheld part of the iron, after a few minutes, it goes to sleep. It cools down, so you're never going to burn up your tip. And it keeps the temperature within plus or minus 2 degrees Celsius, which is the standard for electronics manufacturing. And so what better iron to have than something that meets professional standards? And it holds your solder roll, and it's even now got board holders and stuff. So you can't beat it for the money. This is another one. This is a TS100 you see in the picture, but now they also have the TS101, a little updated version of this. This is a pencil-sized soldering iron that is also digitally controlled, has the sleep mode and everything, and keeps your temperature constant to whatever you set it for. But this thing runs on 12 up to 24 volts, comes with a little power pack that looks like it belongs with a small laptop. And these are about anywhere from $70 to $90, most of them around $80 online. And you can ground it for ESD and so forth. And they come in a nice little kit. And when you replace the tip, you're also replacing the heating element. And it's not that expensive. So with a digital display and full control and sleep mode and everything. It does everything that big one does, but these are great for portable use. And I use one of these when I do group kit builds. The item on the left is a vacuum desoldering station. It is a digital soldering gun, and you can control the temperature in the front panel just like we do with the regular soldering station, but it has a hollow tip. It also has a vacuum line, and what it does is it sucks the solder up through a hollow tip. So when you pick that up, it'll heat up, number one, just like your temperature controlled station, and it will suck up the solder. So if you've got a circuit board and a lead coming out of there and you just poke that over that and you pull the trigger, it cleans the solder and cleans the holes, so that once you get the leads desoldered, it's a lot easier to get that part out. And you can do it quickly, which means you have a good chance of saving that part and putting it where it belongs. These sell for about $120 on Amazon. And so if you're going to do a lot of kit building, or if your club does a lot of events, it might be good to have one of those handy. The one on the right is the Schneider. It sells for $44.95. Guess where? Harbor Freight. And I've always advised against the $6 soldering irons you could get at the hardware store or at Harbor Freight, because they're not regulated and they get too hot and then they cool off too quickly. The reason we want to be temperature controlled is once you put that soldering tip to the circuit board or the parts being soldered and then add solder to it, it draws heat away from the tip. Well, when it's temperature controlled, it senses that and it adds more heat back. That makes for a lot better flow of solder onto the circuit board or parts that you're soldering. And it prevents what we like to call cold solder joints. Now, this particular one is also temperature controlled, but it doesn't have the sleep mode. The other thing is, if you look at it, it's analog. So you just kind of set the dial about the temperature you want. And I kind of recommend 630 degrees when you're working with 6337 solder. And we'll get into that for a little bit. But when you're buying something at Harbor Freight, you're never going to pay the full price, because quite often they have 10, 15, 20% off coupons in your paper or online or whatever. And so I don't think I've ever paid full price for anything at Harbor Freight. You just use those coupons. This one has an analog power supply. It's not a switching supply like the one on the previous page. So it's got kind of a heavier transformer in there, but it works really, really well. I have 3 of these, and I use these with first-time kit builders, and they love them, and they work really, really well. This is solder that you can find locally if you've got a Harbor Freight store. It's item number 58,58000. And you'll look for this spool, and at least my store keeps it next to the welding equipment. I don't know why they do this. Not with electrical, it's with welding. So look there, because if you try to look in the electrical part where there's meters and wire cutters and stuff, you aren't going to find this. It's with welding. They have soldering stations, and they have this in that same area. 6337 is what we call eutectic solder, and that means it has a slightly lower melting point. It is a slightly different mixture, which allows for it to wet better, which means that it coats the leads and the circuit board a lot better. It flows a lot nicer, has a much shorter plastic state. So what that means is it's going to cool off real quick, and you're not going to get a cold solder joint nearly as easy as you do with the 6040 solder. Now, don't throw away that 6040 solder, because I use that on coax connectors, and I use that on my dipoles and so forth. When I get out the hotter iron and so forth, and I'm soldering copper weld or braided or twisted multi-conductor antenna wire and stuff, draws a lot of heat away. I use the 6040 for that, but I use 6337 for everything else, all the small connections that I make. This stuff comes for $19.95 for a half-pound roll. And I like to recommend rosin core, no clean. And guess what? It doesn't say that on it, but after using it, guess what? It is rosin core, no clean, which means that instead of getting a brown rosin residue, you instead get a clear residue or none at all. Some nice things you want to have include a variable voltage power supply with meters, so you can measure the voltage and the current that you're supplying to the circuit. Frequency counter is useful because a lot of times we need to count the frequency that we're using. Make sure we got it in the band and where it belongs. Oscilloscope is really helpful. I found CRT scopes at the Hamfest last weekend, Tektronix even, and these were the smaller ones that aren't as heavy, and they were all under $100. You can also get scope kits online that use LCD. Dummy load is a must. Make sure, of course, it's 50 ohms and that it can handle the amount of power you're going to put into it. Now, a lot of QRP kits don't have VSWR protection. So what I do is when I first power up that kit, if it's a transmitter or transceiver, the very first time I apply voltage to it, once it's all done being assembled, I have a dummy load on it. And the reason is that if you made a mistake somewheres or you accidentally shorted out the key, plugging in on CW or so forth, you're not keyed up into nothing or into a dead short. Either way, you're into a dummy load. Once you've established that it's not transmitting, then you can take that off and hook it to an antenna or whatever, or keep the dummy load in there and have a watt meter so you can adjust your output. We mentioned the vacuum desoldering station. That is a must if you're going to do a lot of kit building. It's always good to have one around if we're doing a group kit building experience. General coverage receiver is good because only a week or so ago, I was building a 40-meter CW transceiver kit, and I hooked it to my outside antenna and heard nothing. And guess what? We just had a G3 level geomagnetic storm with R3 level blackouts. And so the band was dead. So you want to also have a signal strength meter. I mean, not a signal strength meter, a signal generator. And that helps you at least figure out that it's receiving something. And you can do some alignment with that as well as tuning once you get signals back online. AM/FM clock radio is also good for entertainment and time reminders because when you're building kits, you're having a lot of fun. Just don't listen to talk radio when you're trying to build a kit because they're only, especially the sports talk stations, they're there to tick you off, and you don't want to be ticked off. I listen to my favorite classic rock station while I'm building kits. You can throw a random wire out the window for testing receivers. Once again, my doctor's prescription for the right kind of solder to use when you're building kits is 6337 031 or 025 thickness, rosin core, no clean. And make sure you have a solder roll holder so that your solder doesn't go all over the place, because the enemy of all kit builders is cats. And so because I have cats, I have things like this, which is a tackle box, can be used for tools as well. It has 4 removable trays that have movable partitions. I put the bigger parts in between builds up in the top, so I can have as many as 4 kits in progress. And you can find these at Bass Pro or Cabela's, or you can get them like I think at Lowe's or Menards, where they're yellow and black instead of these colors. If you go to Michael's, they are pink and lavender because they use the exact same thing, just different color plastic for jewelry. So when you're sorting the parts into those little pull-out trays, you'll notice that I put the parts that I use most often closest to me. So I have the resistors right there on the lower left, and then you have some different kinds of capacitors. And you kind of work our way back and forth. You got diodes and transistors and then chokes, and then you have your toroid parts and your knobs, and then your plugs, jacks, and other hardware. You can also use a cupcake tray, and you can even ground it for ESD. But if you have kids, cats, dogs, or whatever, any kind of disaster, you don't want to use a cupcake tray. But a lot of times in a group kit build situation, a lot of guys use those. Once again, put the parts that you're using most often closest to you. Now, some kits are stage by stage, and as you can see here, I put little pieces of paper in the bottom of each cup, and I've resized the cups according to how many parts are in that stage. So, for instance, the power supply might be the lower left there, number one, and maybe partly number two as well. So, what we do is we build that stage, and then the instructions tell you to stop. And so you know you've finished it the stage correctly when you run out of parts, and then you follow their instructions. It might say, okay, let's put some power to the board and let's measure the voltage at these different locations. And if those voltages are not right, don't go any further. You might have to uh, remove some parts that you put in wrong or reverse them or something like that. Might not have done something right. So it's kind of a great way for a parts intensive kit like this one that has hundreds of parts. Make sure that once you've completed a stage, it's going to work. So once again, they build them from the power supply onward, and you have instructions that tell you how to test each stage before you go on. So don't skip any of those tests, because otherwise you don't know if the kit is functional. But what's neat about it is when you finish a stage and you test it, you can put your parts away knowing that the kit works perfectly well to that point. And that's a good feeling to have, because otherwise it's a big mystery after 300 parts, and we don't want that. Once again, you're doing smaller numbers of parts at a time, which means you've got more chances for a logical break in the procedure. And once again, when that stage is done, the parts should be all gone in that little cup. And make sure that before you even begin that stage that you have the right test equipment. They may say you just need your meter, or they might say you need a frequency counter or a receiver or something like that. A lot of kits have no sequence at all. So you'll start with all the resistors and then go on to the capacitors and kind of work our way up the hierarchy of electronic parts. Uh, and I would just kind of caution on that. Um, make sure that the supply of each kind of part is used up as you complete the installation of those. You'll go like through the list of resistor numbers and values and put them on the board and solder them. Sometimes there may be parts left over, and that a lot of times is intentional, because there might be different options, like different frequency sound tone or side tones. Uh, it could be different band options, things like that, different bands that kit might cover. So if you have extra parts and you're sure that they weren't needed for that, then you can take those parts assortments you had and you can toss those in there where they belong. And so you've got extra spare parts already sorted out. The trouble with toroids, I think that is one of the biggest complaints I get from kit builders. They don't understand these things and so on, and they're really not that hard. You want to follow the instructions carefully. If you look at a picture like this, you can see what it looks like. And quite often they will show you detailed photos of what it's supposed to look like. You got to unwind the wire carefully, make sure it's not kinked. And if you look at this one on the right, that is not just an inductor, it is a transformer, because you can see there are the two yellow turns. and then you see all the green turns, okay? And those turns are counted as they pass through the center core, the middle of the donut. Now you can see the first and last turns right in front of you at the bottom, and you'll notice that they make it around like 3/4 of the way. Well, the computer program that they use to calculate out how many turns to wind a toroid takes that into account. So when we're counting turns, we're looking at how many times there is a wire going through the middle of the donut. We don't care about the outside, top, or bottom. It's how many times does that pass through the middle of the core. And that's how we count the number of turns. Once it comes time to strip the leads, most commonly the wire that we use is called thermalase wire. And a lot of times the instructions will talk about that. And what you do is you turn up the temperature all the way on your soldering iron. And then you take some solder and make a teardrop size blob on the end. And then I hold it right next to the toroid core. And if you hold it there for a little bit, all of a sudden you'll see some smoke. And what it does is it melts off the insulation. And then what you do is you slowly draw it away from the toroid. So what you're doing is you're removing the insulation and you're tinning the wire at the same time. And that's pretty essential because when you're putting a toroid on a board, especially a double-sided circuit board, you want a strong physical connection to the top and the bottom. And by having it tinned, the solder will flow through and adhere to both sides of that board. So you have both a strong electrical and physical connection to keep the inductor from changing value while you're moving it around. If the insulation is too thick, I just use a lighter to burn it off. And then I use an emery board to clean it, make it nice and golden, and then I tin the wire. Take your time, enjoy it. I tell people if they really hate doing toroids, do them first. And then take a piece of painter's tape or whatever and stick it on there and label it T1, T2, L1, L2, L4, whatever. And put that into one of those cups where your parts are. And now you have the toroid ready. So when it comes time to build the kit, you just stick it in the board and solder it in place. Then you don't have to stop for several minutes and wind the toroid. Some RF chokes look exactly like resistors, so you want to check their markings. A lot of times they're green. Double check your electrolytic and tantalum capacitors for the right value and polarization, because if they're in wrong or the wrong value or so forth, they can make nice little firecrackers. Use a lighted magnifier to check your little resistors, especially the 1/8 watt resistors, and use a meter if necessary to be sure. Get familiar with how to use your meter. And we're going to talk about a gadget that makes things even more fun to figure out what they are. Watch your diode markings, make sure they're correct and they are in the correct position. And you want to be really, really careful when you're bending your leads. There are some very fragile parts like those tiny little glass diodes, the RF chokes with the thin wires, and those tiny little capacitors. If you bend those leads wrong, they could just come right apart. This particular device is sold as a transistor tester, but it really does everything. I could give the Ronco speech like it slices, it dices, it purees. It pretty much does everything. It is a kit. And the instructions are kind of in Chinese English, but as you can see, the parts values and orientation are very clearly marked on the board. So even without the instructions, you can probably put this thing together. The neat thing about this is you'll have 3 leads. They can be any 3 colors. I just take old clip leads and I cut them in half, and then I take the wire and strip that out about 1/4 of an inch, and then I tin it very generously, and then I screw it into those terminals, and it can be red, black, green, or blue, purple, red, or whatever you want to do. It can be any colors you want, as long as you know which one is number 1, which is number 2, and which is number 3. Because when you hook that up, let's say to the 3 leads on a transistor, and you push the button, it's going to light up, tell you the voltage, and it's going to tell you it's testing, and it's going to tell you, oh, this is an NPN transistor, and the collector's on number 1, the base is number 2, and emitter is on number 3, or whatever way you did it. And so it's going to tell you all that information, and it's going to give you the gain of the transistor, and a lot of them give you the voltage drop too across the base. This particular kit costs about $12, and that's the web page where I found it. Like I said, it is a kit. You can get one that is completely assembled except for the case. So it's still a kit, but you don't solder anything. And the battery goes inside that case. The hardest part of it is kind of figuring out how it goes, because there aren't any instructions. So you got to kind of figure out the puzzle of how to screw that thing together and get the battery inside and so forth. Now, instead of 3 terminals, it has a ZIF socket. And that ZIF socket has the numbers. And like I said, you don't have to solder anything because everything on that board is done for you. And it says 123111. Well, that's the numbers. And so if you have the part like that, you can just stick it in there, clamp it down, and it'll tell you what it is. As you can see here, it's telling me what part is in there and its gain and everything else. It's a great way to identify leads on unknown parts or parts that are not marked. I can take those 3 clip leads that I was talking about with a little tinned bare end on the one end, and I can put those in 1, 2, and 3 and clamp it down. Now I have 3 clip leads hanging out, and all you do is you push the button and it tells you what that part is and where it's oriented and if it works and so forth. And then it just goes blank after about 10-15 seconds, and it shuts itself off. So you never have to worry about leaving it on. This kit here is an AM broadcast receiver kit, and it's based on some very early single and dual transistor AM radios and AM radio kits that they had back in the early 60s. This one, you're soldering to pads on the back of the front panel. Now, the entire case is made out of printed circuit board material, and it's all pre-cut, pre-printed and everything. And instead of soldering parts through holes, you're soldering to pads. So what you do is you put a blob of solder on the pad and make sure you got the whole thing covered. And then you put the lead on it, and then you heat it up and put the lead down on there and let it cool off. And then you cut off the extra wire that's left over, because we kind of bend the leads like a U. And so what you end up with is an interesting situation. If you do the part wrong and you want to desolder it, well, you don't need a desoldering tool. All you got to do is take your soldering tip, hold it to that pad, you melt it, and lift up under the wire, and it comes right off without desoldering tools. And I'll show you that kit in a little bit. What you're looking at here is a great kit for a group kit build, especially for first-time builders, because they can use this to power their other kits. Now, I end up with a whole bunch of used laptop power supplies from work, and so I cut off those god-awful Dell and HP connectors, and I strip and tin the 2 leads coming out of it, because they usually put out about 19.4 volts or so. And it can actually have as much as 30 volts AC or DC going into this kit. And you come out with DC only coming out, anywhere from about 17 or 18 volts down to 1.5 volts at 1.5 amps, which is plenty to run a lot of QRP kits. Reason we can get away with AC or DC, and by the way, you can use doorbell transformers or little HVAC transformers that run your thermostat. Those work fine. The power that comes in goes through a full wave bridge rectifier. And so it can take AC or DC in either direction. Goes through 3 stages of filtering, and then the LM317 variable regulator, and you can set the voltage, and away you go. It's kind of a fun little kit. This is a CW transceiver. It is crystal controlled. runs on one 9-volt battery, and it puts out 1 watt, and it has a great receiver on it. Don't confuse that with the Pixies that you can hardly hear, and it's low-level audio and so forth. This thing actually picks up really weak signals, and it works just fine. Of course, the bandwidth is a little broad on receive, but you can tell if somebody is answering you back. And if you look at L1, L2, and L3, those are inductors, but you don't have to wind a toroid. It is spiral wound on the top and the bottom of the circuit board, which is really a cool deal. And so I really like this kit. It was designed by NM0S, and David is one of our main kit designers for 4-state QRP. And he is a senior level engineer for Collins Aerospace, which is Collins Radio in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This kit has the straight key. It doesn't even have a volume control, so I use a headset that's got a built-in volume control. It's got a little switch to turn it on and off. You plug your headset in, you plug your antenna in, and you are on CW with about 1 watt out. And it is a transceiver, and it's a good one for a group kit build as well. Kind of the fun of that one is if everybody's got a quickie dummy load hooked to it, and you can make that like with 2 quarter-watt 100 ohm resistors in parallel, makes a half-watt 50 ohm dummy load, or you can change whatever values you want to make it a full watt or whatever. And you take a little clip lead off of that, and you can be making CW contacts throughout the room without a big antenna. It's a lot of fun. This kit here is a little different. I hate to say it, but I just found out last week that he is retiring. And so this kit will not be available after what he has runs out. Now, he makes his kits almost foolproof. He puts the parts in these long strips of pouches that are a continual strip. And so you take your scissors and you open each pouch and dump those parts out on your work surface. So you're only dealing with a handful of parts at a time. You'll notice that the boards have surface mount parts already done for you. And this is a trend in kits where regular through-hole parts are not available. So what they'll do is they'll put the surface mount parts in, and if they're too small for the average builder, what they'll do is they'll pre-mount those parts for you and test them out so you know they all work. Neat thing about this kit is if you look at the toroids, they're already wound and tinned for you. You just can't beat that. It is a 4-band CW transceiver. It works on 40, 30, 20, and 17 meters. And those bands are really the fun ones to do, like Parks on the Air and so forth. Puts out a solid 5 watts. Has a great receiver on it and no confusing menus, and it's all analog controls. But it has a digital display, as you can see. It's all digital synthesized. This is a Go kit that I have set up, and I use that doing parks and summits on the air while I was in Branson. A lot of fun, and get it while you can, because this guy is going out of business. This is a good kit for a club, for a simple beginner's kit. The only caution I have is on the bottom of the circuit board has a flat pack 16-pin surface mount IC. And I can teach in person a method where I solder the upper right and lower left on this chip to their pads first, and all the other leads are all lined up. And then I take the soldering iron and I run a blob of solder down it. And I don't care if it shorts out or anything between pins. I just make sure that there's solder on each pin and each pad. And then what I do is I hold the board upright and I lay the soldering tip horizontally across a group of pins and heat it all up. And I draw the solder away onto the tip. I clean the excess off, and I do the rest of the pins that way. And it looks nice and professional. And you're not going to overheat the IC doing that. You can also use a solder paste method and so forth. I use this kit a lot for groups because with the earpieces and everything, I think I get like $8 or $10 for this kit. But it is a high quality FM stereo receiver. And you can see it doesn't have a lot of parts besides that IC. And it's a great beginner's kit, and they get rewarded by turning that thing on and hearing their favorite music in full stereo. So what I do sometimes, some groups have requested that I pre-assemble the IC, like your scout groups and so on. And so what I do is I'll put the IC on each of the kits. So all they have to do is the other parts. If you have somebody who's a skilled builder who wants to do that, that's fine. Or we can take the time and teach each builder how to put the IC on. It just depends on how much time you have and what the skill level of your group is. But other than that one part, which like I said, if you've got somebody good at it that can put that part on for you, you're going to be done with these kits in maybe a half an hour or 40 minutes at the most. And it's actually a high quality receiver. Now, the earbuds that I supply with them are stereo, but they're not real high quality. But when I plug my Bose headsets into this, it really sounds good. And it picks up signals like from Omaha, 50 miles away, quite well. This is a 3D printed dipole kit, and this is my latest thing that I'm messing with. And all we're doing is we're making a one-to-one balun, and we're mostly doing 15, 12, and 10 meter dipoles with it, although one guy has made a 20 meter dipole with it. The problem is that we're using like 24 gauge wire, and so when you're getting a little longer and you got the weight of the wire and the coax and everything, it's going to stretch your antenna wires. You can use a thicker wire if you want, and that would prevent that. But this is mostly a design that seems to work better at least maybe 17 meters and above, and works quite well. And if you're going to use it on 6 meters, you don't have to use the balun. You just use the holes on the top as strain relief. And I am printing these myself on my Bamboo Labs printer. So my tips are: remove the distractions, let voicemail pick up your phone calls. RTFM stands for read the fine manual. Yes, I sometimes say the other word as well. Use your cookie sheet to keep things from getting away and protect your surface. Now, I don't use a foil pan. I actually use a metal cookie sheet, and you can get those for $1.25 at Dollar Tree, which I like to call $1.25 tree now. Make sure you have your batteries and power supply ready, and you might want to test the output of those with your meter. And a lot of times when I buy batteries in bulk or something, sometimes you'll have a bad one. So you want to check all your batteries and power supply and your polarity and so forth before you hook everything in. Keep your standard spare parts on hand in case there's any upgrades, any modifications or repairs that you need. Keep your tip clean. I clean mine when I hang it up and when I pick it up. Don't use incandescent light. You want to use bright white LED or fluorescent light on your magnification so you can see the colors correctly. We call that color temperature. So we look for a cool white, or what's called bright white, not a warm white. Take your time and enjoy the fun. And this is what I look like and sound like at the end of sweepstakes. Everybody needs Nebraska. So let's see if we can do this, and I should be back to normal. Am I back?
You are.
You are, Joe.
Okay, good. So I have a lot of fun doing this. This is the Morania kit. As you can see, it's made out of PC board material that's been etched because we have a ferrite bar, so we don't want it shielded in there. It's got a big bar antenna, real big speaker, and works real well. This is a CW transmitter, puts out about 5 watts. And you'll notice it also has those spiral wound coils. And I love those. You don't have to wind a toroid. It's part of the circuit board. And he's coming up with um, an antenna kit that has a snap-on ferrite choke that has printed circuit board leads going around. I don't have the picture on this presentation right now, but it's really cool, and it's going to be the first one of its kind where we'll have a dipole kit that the balun, all you do is you snap a choke over the circuit board, and it's all wound for you, and you just solder the wires to the board, and you've got yourself a dipole. So there's a lot of neat stuff out there. I'm trying to see what else I've got. I do have the Pentec kit that I talked about earlier, and it's in my Go kit, and there it is. That'll do it. That looks a little better. So it's a neat transceiver, and I've made a lot of contacts with it, and people say, well, what is it? And I say, well, it's a TR35, and so they have to look it up. But it's a really good kit and a lot of fun. And like I was showing earlier, this is the latest one I've been messing with. I am now writing the manuals for a lot of the 4-state kits that are coming out. This is one of them, and we have several kits that will be coming out this year. I also did the manual for the one we came out with last year, which is a surface mount dummy load watt meter. And I 3D printed cases for it, and so that everybody who built one got a case when I did that kit in Orlando this last February. So these things are real simple also. You just screw in an SO239 and solder some wires to it, and you got a dipole. So 3D printing has become a big part of kit building, and so I get to do both, and so it's even more fun. This is a antenna winder. This is the K6ARK design. I did not design this. All I did was adjust it for the different kind of filament that I'm using and for my printer. Let's see. It says somebody put up something. You've got all sorts of, you got Micro Center. I love Micro Center. The closest one to me, and that's where I got this 3D printer, is Kansas City. It's about 3 hours from me, and I will be there this weekend for the Shriners Ham Fest. So definitely Micro Center is really a must-have. I'm glad that you have one in the Denver area. Any questions?
Let me interrupt you just a second, Joe. Jeff has the drawing in the chat. I think there's 6 or 7. So if you're a DRC member and you want to participate, we'll go in the chat, and the link is there under Jeff's name. Go ahead, Joe.
All right. And I've heard of this Electronics USA. Somebody listed on Colfax. I think Colfax is kind of an older neighborhood where you're going on East Colfax, I think. But I might try to visit there when I'm in your area. Surplus Sales is surplus. I think that's Surplus Sales of Nebraska. Not sure, but I think it is. And they have a lot of inductors and things like that. But yeah, you're lucky to have a place like on Colfax and Micro Center, and you have your own HRO store there. I'd be in heaven if I was living there, or at least close to it with the mountains and so forth. That way you could do summits on the air and parks on the air. We don't have any summits here in eastern Nebraska. So any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to your meeting, unless there's any other questions.
I got a question about the clock in your background. It looks like it's 20 minutes off.
Yeah, it's messed up right now. I had a little trouble with the setting program. That is the doomsday clock. like to call it. It actually, for 11 years, was on the wall at the Stratcom Global Nuclear Command Center at Offutt Air Force Base. And when they moved to the new facility next door, they were decommissioning this, and a friend of mine was uninstalling stuff and found that on a pile marked declassified for disposal. It was supposed to be thrown away. He hung on to it, got permission, and gave it to me. And so right now I have to mess with the setting program on my laptop to synchronize it again. And as long as it doesn't say incoming and Cheyenne Mountain there in Colorado isn't talking to it, we're all right.
Yeah, sounds good.
But that's what its job was. It showed Zulu time, and then it would say incoming and tell where it's whatever is coming in is headed to and count down until impact. Or if we sent something the other way, it would say where it was going and how long it was to impact. So it is kind of a interesting piece of memorabilia.
Have you checked it with the settle?
But yeah, the clock is not right. I had some problems a few days ago, and I need to clear it out, reboot it, and reprogram it.
Thank you.
Okay, any other final questions for Joe? Joe, we appreciate it. Very, very interesting.
Glad to do it, and hope to see you in person sometime in Denver. Really, really enjoy it. I'm going to try and make the Hamfest that's, I can't remember, as like just north of you guys, Fort Collins or whatever. I'm going to try and make that maybe in January. It all depends on the weather, because I'd be driving from here in Nebraska. So just normally the 6-7 hour drive might get a little dicey in January on the Front Range, as you know.
There's a Bark Fest in Boulder and a Lark Fest in, I don't know if they do that in Longmont or where they do that.
The Lark Fest was 2 weeks ago.
Oh, it's already passed. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometime I'll get out there.
The next one's down in PPARC, I think, Pikes Peak, down south.
Okay,
But,
that'd be Colorado Springs.
Yeah, it's
Monument.
Monument.
Monument. Okay,
It's
very good.
at a high school down there. So
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Mhm.
well, thank you. Maybe we'll talk you into coming back sometime.
Love to do it. I can talk about
Great.
3D printing, and I also talk about pirate, spy, and clandestine radio. And I have
Okay.
recordings, so it's kind of fun.
Mhm.
Okay, well, we'll make note of that. That's great.
Mhm.
Thank you again.
You bet.
And where are we sitting, Jeff, on the drawing?
Joe, thanks so much. We've got 8 entries now.
Anybody, any final there to put your name in? Do it quick. Odds are pretty good with 8. There's nothing else coming in whenever.
That's 12.5%.
That's probably pretty good. Better than the lotto that the people just hit for how many? Over $1 million. Or wow, how could you do that? 1 point something billion. Okay. Go ahead, Jeff, whenever you're
Okay, I'm
ready.
going to randomize the range. Here we go.
Randomize it.
So our one tonight is Frankie Freeman, KC0JAV.
Frankie, well, congratulations. You will get your information, and Kathy will send you out a certificate here within the next day or so. So congrats and thanks. Nothing final. We'll let you all go back to whatever you want to do. And remember our DRC Saturday coming up here
Mhm.
on April 27th. And I think Jerome mentioned should be very interesting in May. We're going to do a Pico balloon. So
What?
that'll be a lot of fun. A what?
I said a what balloon?
A pico balloon, a very small balloon
Okay.
with a little solar powered, very, very low wattage transmitter that they've been known to circle or I think the record's something like 8 times circle the Earth. So that'll be our May. That'll be very interesting. And they do
that
that on
something-
can't think of the mode, the very low power mode. What am I thinking? Well, anyway, that's all we got. Thanks, everybody.
Is that balloon something that can be shot down by the Air Force?
I guess it could. They've done it before.
Yeah. Okay. Later, Jerry. And
Yeah, it's
everyone.
it's a party-sized balloon,
Hmm.
so it's very small.
Yeah.
Be a lot of fun. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.